Thank you for joining our webinar, Streamlining Your HITRUST Journey with Cloudticity, AWS, and HITRUST. My name is Jessica Brown, and I will be your moderator today. I'd like to now introduce our presenters. Unfortunately, Jerry Miller was not able to make it today, so in for him is Kate Turchin, Senior Director of Marketing at Cloudticity. We've got Cheryl Cage, Principal Security Partner and Strategist at AWS, and Ryan Patrick, VP of Adoption at HITRUST. I'd like to now hand it over to Kate to get us started.
Thanks, Jessica. Let's talk about the current state of HITRUST, the current state of healthcare, and what's driving the need for HITRUST. Ransomware attacks have increased 74% over this past year. Last year, 60% of healthcare companies were hit with ransomware. The average cost of a data breach is increasing in healthcare, and it costs more than in any other industry. The average cost is $10.9 million for a successful data breach. 35% of healthcare data breaches occurred via third-party vendors, and more payers and providers are requiring HITRUST of vendors to reduce that third-party risk. You can go next slide, thank you. Why organizations need HITRUST. At Cloudticity, we are a HITRUST certified organization, and so there's a few big reasons why for us we need HITRUST, and we encourage all our clients to get HITRUST. There's security assurance, which is the main purpose of HITRUST, to reduce that risk of a security breach. But then we're also seeing that companies that have HITRUST, including ourselves, we're able to get our cyber insurance premiums lowered. And it's also really beneficial because, as you know, most healthcare companies are managing multiple compliance frameworks. Different clients have their different flavor of HIPAA, FISMA, NIST, or whichever they are wanting to attest to. So if you're managing these multiple frameworks for these different clients, HITRUST can help you attest to multiple frameworks in one workflow instead of having piecemeal compliance workflows. And reducing third-party risk, HITRUST does have a third-party risk assurance program to help you evaluate your vendors, or you can be like a lot of companies and just require that all your vendors are HITRUST certified, which is going to drastically reduce your risk. And then there's the other side of it. There's the sales and marketability side. A lot of companies won't do business in healthcare with a company that isn't HITRUST certified. So even just getting your product or service evaluated by some of these vendors, you're going to need HITRUST. And then it also accelerates sales cycles. We had one client recently tell us that getting HITRUST made their sales cycles go 6 months faster because they're not answering all these security questionnaires, and because when they show that proof of HITRUST, that's enough to make these potential clients trust them and get the deal done a lot faster. Next slide, please. And this is an interesting stat that just came out of the 2024 HITRUST Trust Report. Only 0.64% of organizations that received HITRUST certifications reported a breach. So that's huge. The risk is so low if you get HITRUST that you're going to get breached. And so that's the biggest reason to really get HITRUST certified, is to avoid everything that you guys know comes with a breach.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and just as maybe to head off some questions, which I hope everybody feels energized and motivated to throw some questions our way. Feel free to do it in real time. If we can answer it in real time, we will. But, ask the hard-hitting questions. But to that point, I want to just point out one thing on that last statistic, is that 0.64%, which in and of itself is a pretty compelling number. When we released that trust report, I got a lot of questions around, well, what does that mean? Where does that data come from? What is that data based on? Is that only R2 customers? So, and I think the question just came in, which is what I was about to say, is that 0.64% was over a 2-year period. It is inclusive of all 3 certification options for HITRUST. But with that said, the overwhelming majority are R2 certified organizations, because that's what we've been doing for 17 years. The E1 and the I1 are still pretty new, but they are sprinkled in there. The last thing that I would offer to the group is we contractually require organizations to report security incidents and or breaches to us if it's within a HITRUST certified environment. We also are monitoring publicly available information. If we identify a customer that has had an incident, we then reach out. So we're not just relying on our customers to tell us that they've had an incident. We're actively and contractually requiring them to do that. So if there's any additional questions on that, happy to answer those. But getting into the next slide, let's talk about the assessment process at a really high level. We're not going to get into some really nitnoid details. This deck is based on an assumption that most folks are coming with at least an entry-level knowledge of the HITRUST process, but just so we're all kind of level set. The CSF itself is over 2,000 controls at this point. This 1,200 controls is representative of some of the largest assessments I've seen. So even though there's over 2,000 controls in the HITRUST CSF, the average size assessment is roughly 250 to 350, but I've seen some as large as 1,200. But that's when you start to tailor the assessment and bring in additional what we call regulatory factors. When I say regulatory factors, I'm talking about other sources such as other framework standards or regulations. So as you bring those in, it can increase the control count. But bottom line is the average size for the R2, somewhere in the 250 to 350 range. The I1 is a static set of controls at 182, and the E1 is a static set of controls of 44, and both the E1 and the I1 are specifically focused on the implementation of controls and less focused on policies and processes. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't be asked to produce your policies and processes, because sometimes that is the implemented control for the E1 and the I1. But I just want to make clear that it is focused solely on the implemented maturity level. As far as completion times, we've seen assessments, primarily the E1, get done in actually a matter of weeks, if not months. So I think the fastest we've seen come through is right around 60 days from the time that the assessment was started to the time it was submitted to us. So we typically tell folks, if you're pursuing the E1, you can look at anywhere from a month to say 4 months to get through that process. The I1, probably around 4 months to 12 months. And then the R2, depending on the complexity and the scope of the assessment, it's typically around 12 to 18. And in some organizations, really complex, really big assessments, it can be in the 24-month period. That's why I call the R2 the most comprehensive. And if you've ever heard me speak before, I usually say it's a significant emotional event, and I wouldn't be doing myself justice if I didn't say it here. So I have now. Bottom line is HITRUST is not a check the box exercise. It is a trust but verify. And if you look at that last bullet on the slide, this is not just an IT or a security assessment. It is going to look at the full breadth of the organization, because each department or each element of the organization has a role in protecting sensitive data or protecting the environment. So it's going to look at physical security, which I think Cheryl's going to talk a lot about today. It's going to look at third-party risk management. It's going to look at HR practices, hiring procedures, termination procedures. It's going to look at, are your executives involved? Is there actually an information protection program in place? So on and so forth. So if you're thinking about HITRUST and you're looking to build that groundswell, you need to go outside the four walls of IT and or security and start talking about really all aspects of the business and getting your executives bought in. If we can go on to the next slide. This is an oversimplification of the HITRUST process, but it is a good representation of the typical process, right? So most organizations, in my experience, and I didn't really give you much of my background, before coming to HITRUST, I worked as an external assessor for 10 plus years, helping organizations get HITRUST certified. And nobody in my experience is ready to take on HITRUST on day one. So there's a lot of prep work. There's a lot of remediation in some cases, primarily with the I1 and the R2, the E1 being the absolute essentials. Most people are doing those 44 things, but typically you're going to see your external assessor do some kind of benchmarking or readiness exercise with you to identify where your gaps may be. Once those gaps are identified, they should help you prioritize which of those gaps you're going to remediate. You'll then remediate those gaps. They'll do their final testing and evaluation. Once that testing and evaluation is done, they are required to go through some internal QA processes. They submit it to us, and then we run our QA on top of that. If the scoring threshold is met, you will get stamped HITRUST certified. You may have a question around, what is the typical QA timelines? I can tell you that right now we're actually working about 2 weeks ahead of submission windows, and it's taking, for the R2, just under 30 days to get through that process. The E1 and the I1 are even faster. So it is not as arduous and time consuming to get the actual stamp of certification from HITRUST anymore. We've put some processes in place. We've got a reservation-based QA system. So it is a much more efficient process. So if we can move on, now that we have this, at least a general level set of the HITRUST process, we can talk about what the heck is this shared responsibilities in inheritance program. And at the simplest level, we realize at HITRUST that most organizations have migrated to the cloud. They do not manage directly a lot of their core infrastructure, a lot of their physical infrastructure. It's being managed on their behalf. And we recognize that we need to build a program to make that process a lot easier. Cheryl, representing AWS, probably does not answer the door when someone knocks on it all that often when people come in and say, hey, can we please test within your data center and your environment? That doesn't really happen. It's not efficient. It's woefully unnecessary. So what we've done is we've built this program, and you can see on the slide, this is just a snapshot. There's more organizations that are a part of this shared responsibilities program that have come to publish their HITRUST certified environments for you all as a customer in order to inherit the work that they've already done against HITRUST, but probably more importantly, the work that they're doing on your behalf within the environments and that your systems and applications are built on. So I'm going to pause there, maybe take a breath, maybe take a drink of water, pass it over to Kate and Cheryl to talk about the specific Cloudticity and AWS shared responsibilities matrices, but we're going to get into way more detail on what the heck this means. I'm just trying to give you a really high level. So Kate, Cheryl?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So Cloudticity is a certified shared responsibility and inheritance provider, which means that you can inherit the work that we've already done if you're one of our clients and streamline your journey so you don't have to do that work. You can access our shared responsibility matrix on the HITRUST website if you want to download it and see exactly which controls are inheritable. I encourage you to do so. We offer over 500 inheritable controls. 425 of them are partially inheritable, and about 85 of them are fully inheritable, which means that that is work that you don't have to do when you are a client. And Cheryl, if you want to speak to the AWS side of inheritance.
Yeah, and I would just say customers of AWS should definitely download our latest AWS HITRUST SRM. I think it was just released like last month. So it has support for HITRUST CSF 11.3. So it helps you determine which controls you can inherit from us as part of our shared responsibility model. And it's also intended to serve as a resource to help customers use the shared responsibility model and help you navigate your security compliance needs. So provides an overview, like Kate was saying, of the control inheritance. And you can also use it to perform the control scoring and inheritance functions, for the AWS services you are utilizing inside your environment.
Let's talk about why inheritance. What are the key benefits? You can go to the next slide, please. Inheritance reduces the need for duplicative and redundant direct control testing that is covered and obtained under a valid assessment. And it identifies control mappings and leverages assessment results within one system to efficiently process inheritance information exchange. It provides transparency and visibility so you can really understand the existing controls. And it's the industry's only inheritance capability for third-party assurance. So it's really well suited for shared cloud-based control environments. As Brian said, most companies are on the cloud, and when you're in the cloud, there's a shared responsibility between who's securing what, who's managing compliance for the infrastructure, for the data. And so when you are using the HITRUST shared responsibility in inheritance program, you can really see in a granular way and understand what your responsibilities are versus the responsibilities of all your other vendors, so that there's never any discrepancy or ambiguity around the security controls that your organization owns. Next slide.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here and answer a question that came up because I think it's relevant to the talk track we're on right now. So the question came out, is there a carve-out method similar to SOC 2? So the answer is yes and no. So for the R2, HITRUST does not allow for carve-outs. You have to include the entire environment from top to bottom within your assessment object, and obviously the assessment itself. For the E1 and I1, there is the capability to carve out. Now, with that said, we don't see a lot of organizations actually carving out with the E1 and I1. They are still including their cloud environments within their assessments. And we actually really appreciate that, because the reason why we require full scope within the R2 is we feel really passionately that if you're going to rely on a HITRUST certification, especially the one that is the most robust and thorough, it needs to have the greatest visibility and the greatest transparency to the entire environment. And I think that with organizations within the HITRUST ecosystem have realized that there is value in that, and then ultimately the consumer of HITRUST certification reports also do that. So that is the reason why we're not seeing as many organizations carve out. But getting back to the slide itself, we actually have built inheritance into all three assessments. You can see on the slide that for the R2, it's roughly 70% inheritable. And I want to be really, really clear in what I'm saying. When I say 70% inheritable, that is not full inheritance, meaning you just request it, the great folks like Cheryl over at AWS review it and approve it, and you get to pull all of that work into your assessments. There is partial inheritability. And it is admittedly somewhat, I don't want to say ambiguous, but subjective to the environments, to the inheritance provider, in this case, AWS, to your external assessor, and then ultimately your environment. So HITRUST doesn't dictate the specific percentages because everybody's different. So that 70% is representative of both fully and partially inheritable requirements, aka controls within the HITRUST CSF. For the I1, that 70 goes up to 75, and then for the E1, it's roughly 85% partially or fully inheritable. Now, in this conversation, we're talking about inheriting from Cloudticity, inheriting from AWS, but there is the capability to internally inherit. So if you're already a HITRUST certified organization and you want to get another elements or a piece of your environment certified, wherever there's shared services that have already been tested and certified, you can actually inherit across your organization. So again, that reduces the level of effort, it reduces the cost, it reduces the time. And I meant to point this out when I first started speaking, that Kate's a rock star for jumping in last minute. So thank you, Kate, for doing this. But Cloudticity is in a really unique position. They're one of maybe a handful of organizations that are not only inheritance providers, but they were also consumers of inheritance. So they're on both sides of the coin. So they have a really interesting perspective on this whole program, which is arguably why we love getting on the phone with them and showing you all what they're doing within this space. So if there's any questions on the percentages of inheritance, please throw them into the question box. If we can move on to the next slide. What we saw in 2023 is that 68% of R2 validated assessments utilized external inheritance. And I can tell you that that number has gradually increased over the years. When this program first was launched about 5 or 6 years ago, the inheritance consumption was not as high as that number now, and we're seeing a trend line very much up into the right in consumption. And I think that really has to do with people realizing, one, that this is a capability, and two, the benefits of doing so. So you may be wondering, well, what the heck does the assessment look like if I don't utilize inheritance? And I kind of alluded to this. You would have to go knock on Cheryl's door and say, pretty please, may I come into the AWS environment, which they will say no, and conduct testing. Or you will have to rely on other assurance mechanisms that the AWS environment has in place. So the standard one that I think most people kind of gravitate towards is SOC 2. You'd have to request their SOC 2 attestation. You can rely on that work. I can tell you that it's not as reliable within the HITRUST world as most people think, because HITRUST is very prescriptive and SOC 2s can be less prescriptive. And unless it is specifically stated in the SOC 2 report that shows that the requirement is satisfied based on the control testing within that attestation, you won't be able to use that for your HITRUST work. So there's the chance in a world without inheritance that you may not be able to demonstrate that you have the controls in place and they're functioning and capable in the intent that they are designed to be capable and functioning. So again, thinking about an organization that may have more than one environment or more than one system HITRUST certified, if you did not have inheritance, you are going to do all that redundant testing again, right? So I mentioned internal inheritance, shared services within an organization. You get system A HITRUST certified. With system B, you're doing all the same testing, because again, HITRUST is a trust but verify assessment and certification and methodology. So we don't just assume that the controls that you have in system A are actually functioning the way that they're intended to function for system B. So we would require redundant testing in that assessment. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to pass it back over to Cheryl, and she's going to jump into all the great things that AWS is doing in this space.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And just as Ryan's been talking about, inheritance and control responsibility. And he threw out those numbers, and a lot of those controls, like Ryan stated, are shared. So that's why we need to talk about the shared responsibility when we talk about HITRUST. So just like AWS is certified, HITRUST certified, Cloudticity is HITRUST certified, customers that need to be HITRUST certified still need to go through that same process. So it's important they understand which components they are responsible for within the scope of services that comprise, their AWS environment. So this is where the AWS HITRUST SRM and the AWS shared responsibility model can help. So if everyone has seen the AWS shared responsibility model, so AWS, we're responsible for security of the cloud, where the customer is responsible for security in the cloud, security and compliance in the cloud. So it breaks down the controls into the controls that can be inherited, controls that are shared, and then those controls that are solely the customer responsibility. And at AWS, we take on the hardware, that global infrastructure, the regions, all our availability zones, our edge locations, and how they function and operate. But we also encompass, the infrastructure software responsible for the compute and storage, database and network services. But then you have to think about what you as an AWS customer are responsible for that in the cloud. So it's whatever you bring into it. So that includes your network configurations, your customer controlled encryption, the identity and access management piece, your applications, and then that customer data. So, and also you have to think about the different AWS services you are utilizing in your environment. So some of those AWS services that you're using, and this is why what Ryan was talking about inheritance, it's difficult to measure, because if you're using 40 AWS services in your environment, they all might have varying degrees of inheritance there. So like AWS, we take on more responsibility if you are using our service such as, our RDS or relational database service, or serverless such as like Lambda. And then there are other services such as EC2 that have more configurable options that the customer has more responsibility. So to break this all down for you, to help you even more, we take the HITRUST SRM, we take the AWS shared responsibility model. Then we also have what our team has developed are these customer compliance guides. So what they do is they take our AWS services, our shared responsibility model, down to the AWS service level. And they're mapped to the different compliance frameworks. So you can look at this requirement based on the service that you're using and see how to best configure that service following the AWS best practices in order to meet your part of that control. So these are available on our AWS compliance resources page, and they're also available to download in the AWS artifact service. But I also go right ahead.
I just want to jump in because you once told, or you drew a comparison that has stuck with me, and I've used it in other conversations to clearly delineate what the heck you're talking about, and it's around the HOAs. Can you tell that story really quick? Because I think it's super simple, and I just love it.
Yeah, if you look at, if you think about a homeowners association, right? AWS, we're responsible for those common areas, the infrastructure, the construction of the public amenities, or if there's a basketball court or pickleball court, and then the street access. But then if you as holding a mortgage on that, owning that property, you're responsible for securing your home. So it's your contents, your home maintenance, who has access to your house, and ensuring only the proper people enter your home. And then I will say, and then the partner piece here, you could think about them as, oh, I want to put up a fence on my property, or I want to install some security cameras. You would enlist a partner or a contractor to help you, get down to help protect your home for those pieces. So that's where our partners come in to help even more and take on more of those, that inheritance from you, and take that burden off of your shoulders. And then I think we can go to the next slide. Yes. AWS services and scope page. So this is where you will go to find all the AWS services that have been assessed for HITRUST. So when you're building out your HITRUST environment, you want to go to the services and scope page and check to make sure the services that you want to utilize in your environment are currently certified under the HITRUST CSF. You can go to the next one. And then this, I just want to talk about our program, AWS, what my team does, how we work with Kate, and how we work with Ryan. So the team that we run is called the Global Security and Compliance Acceleration Program. It's a mouthful, so we call it GSCA for short. We are a global program, so we focus on all different types of industry verticals, so healthcare, financial services, public sector, privacy, and then of course we're in the Gen AI regulatory compliance now too. So one thing though that we're consistently asked by our customers is, how do I get compliant with X? So if we put HITRUST in there, our focus on our team is not only to help our customers build those secure and capable workloads, but then we want them to be able to adhere to the HITRUST CSF requirements and achieve their certification to help automate and accelerate that process too, while reducing the cost and overhead to achieve your certification. Our team, we're led by AWS security partner strategists like myself, and then we have AWS solutions architects. So generally, the security strategists, we're former third-party assessors and auditors, so we have that deep experience and that compliance knowledge. We can provide informal advisory services at no cost, so we can help answer questions, we can join meetings, we can act as subject matter experts for you to provide guidance, based on your questions. And then when you reach out to us, we set up an initial 30-minute call to go over your compliance pursuits, and then we'll discuss the typical process it takes for HITRUST, the typical costs, and the timeline to achieve. And then we're going to introduce you to partners that can help really accelerate that process. Partners are a main piece of our program because they're the true experts in this space. So, we're partner-led, partner-driven. So we have the robust and expert community of security and compliance partners, such as Cloudticity and HITRUST, and they're the ones that are the true experts, and they can accelerate your path to compliance. And I also just want to add, for Cloudticity, we have added the GSCA partner bundles on AWS Marketplace. We launched this last year at reInvent. So customers and partners seeking to meet HITRUST requirements, they need more than one partner to help them. So you're usually going to need an advisor, probably a compliance platform, and then you're going to need, the assessor. So what we've done is we've put these together and called them GSCA partner bundles, and we've had our partners list them on AWS Marketplace. So this will help you cover the entire HITRUST process from migration to well-architected reviews to certification. And it streamlines that process for you. It covers the entirety of the compliance framework journey. And you can go ahead on AWS Marketplace and look up Cloudticity's listing there. Next one.
Thanks, Cheryl. I'll touch on how you can work with Cloudticity and AWS to streamline your HITRUST journey. So just a little bit about us is that we are an MSP. We only do public cloud. We've been managing public cloud workloads on AWS only in the healthcare sector since 2011. And kind of the problem that we're solving is a lot of healthcare companies, they're using the cloud, but there's gaps in terms of cybersecurity, expertise, tooling, and it's just a big lift to build out that whole cloud operations team when doing so doesn't necessarily add a ton of value to your business, right? You need cloud operations and security to work and work really well, and you need the best expertise to protect you from breaches, but it's not a business differentiating activity such as developing your product and releasing innovative features that actually benefit patients and providers. So that's kind of where we come in, is we're your plug and play cloud operations, security operations, and compliance operations team. And we can simplify that a lot more. You don't have to worry about staffing and tools. We provide all of that for you. So that's kind of why organizations sign up with us. You can move on to the next slide, please. And I'll touch on our shared responsibility model. I know Cheryl talked about it. This is just what it looks like when you partner with AWS and you partner with Cloudticity. Your security responsibilities get reduced even more. So like I said, then you can really focus on innovating with your product and building those value-adding features. Next slide, please. And when you partner with us, like I said, you reduce your security responsibility, and you can also, we have a HITRUST acceleration program, so you can inherit over 500 inheritable and partially inheritable controls. As Cheryl mentioned, you can check out our bundle, which includes our assessor, our compliance platform, and our inheritance program, so that you can just do that all in one instead of shopping for these piecemeal solutions, and it makes HITRUST a lot easier. Next slide, please. And we've actually found that our inheritance program can reduce the HITRUST R2 timeline by 25 to 62%. And actually, more often it's closer to the 50 and 60% time reduction, because as Ryan said earlier, most HITRUST assessments are going to have a few hundred controls. They're not going to, only rarely is it going to be a really big assessment with 800 or 1200 controls or more. So that is a huge value add for our customers, because they're getting HITRUST and it's easier, it's faster, it's just less disruptive, right? It's going through any audit, any compliance process is going to take employees away from their day jobs. So what we do is we give you that time back so that you can drive business initiatives and get your business ahead. Next slide, please. So yeah, like I said, the benefits: faster HITRUST certification, and focus on innovation and focus on healthcare instead of keeping the lights on activities, and reduce those security management responsibilities. One of my favorite people at Cloudticity always said, we do all the stuff that you don't want to do so that you can focus on the stuff that you do want to do. And that's very simple, but I think that's the biggest benefit of partnering with us and partnering with AWS and HITRUST. Next slide.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about shared responsibilities, inheritance, and you may be wondering, well, how do we do it? So it's actually pretty simple. So for those of you who are not familiar, all HITRUST assessments are completed in a web-based application that HITRUST makes available called MyCSF. And we've built the entire program in that application. So if you're an entity looking to get HITRUST certified and you're working within AWS and Cloudticity, they've made their assessments that are HITRUST certified, as we've mentioned, available within MyCSF or inheritance. So when you look at the individual requirements, there's a button on there that speaks to inheritance. You click that, you say, hey, I want to inherit this control from this provider, Cloudticity. And this is the percentage of this control that I would like to inherit. That information then gets routed to the Cloudticity team or the AWS team. They review it. So it's not going to be instantaneous because they have to review, one, hey, make sure you're a customer. Two, make sure this is the same environment in which they are providing services to you, so on and so forth. If everything's copacetic, they hit approve. Automatically, their scores are then populated within your assessment. So if it's fully inheritable, that requirement is now done. So you quickly see, as Kate has pointed out, with those percentages, you do the math. If you have, 45 controls that are fully inheritable, that's 45 less than the, say, 350 that you were originally subject to. That drastically starts to save you time. Ultimately, in theory, saves you money with your external assessor because they don't have to do full testing on that, so on and so forth. So it's a fully automated process at this point. I can tell you that we are working behind the scenes to make it even more efficient. So based on the scoping of a HITRUST assessment, and this is all kind of in design phase, so don't hold me completely accountable to this. I'm just painting a picture for you. In the scoping of your assessment, you will say, hey, I'm in Cloudticity, I'm using these AWS services. Once you define that, and you request inheritance, it could get matched almost instantaneously. It will auto approve, so to speak, those inheritance requests, which will drastically reduce the effort on the Cloudticity and AWS side, but also speed up your ability to continue to progress your assessment forward. Some things that are not on the slide that I would offer to you, you think back to the slide where I talked about the assessment process. There's that readiness phase, there's the remediation phase, and there's the validation phase, and then ultimately certification. I see a lot of organizations request inheritance during the validation phase. I would push that as far to the left as possible and do it in the readiness phase to get it out of the way. Generally, all of the CSPs that have published for inheritance are responsive, but you never know what can happen. And if you wait until the very last minute, they may not respond in time and your assessment submission can get delayed. The sooner that you can identify what is inheritable and at what percentage, the easier it's going to be. Because if you remember, readiness is designed to identify your gaps, your shortcomings to certification. If you don't know what you're able to inherit and to what degree, and you get from readiness into remediation, and then you start validation, you may be doing things that you didn't need to do because you could inherit that. Or conversely, you made an assumption about what you could inherit, didn't address it in remediation, now you're in validation, and it can cause a problem. So I would recommend, based on experience, based on pain that I've had personally with customers, do that inheritance work as early on in the process as possible. It will make the entire process that much more efficient and that much more painless, if you will. So I would request, because we're coming up on some of the end of the planned content. Make sure you get your questions out there. This is the perfect chance to ask me the most riveting HITRUST questions that there are, or for Cheryl and Kate as well. But I want to pass it back over, well, really to the group, and I'll get us started. So if we can go to the next slide. To further the benefits and further the ability to make HITRUST assessments less painful, right? And say that without hesitation, as someone who used to do HITRUST assessments, they can be painful, right? Because I've told you, it's a trust but verify exercise. You cannot just assume that these things are in place. You have to prove that these things are in place, these security controls. Well, HITRUST listened to the market. People have been asking us for years, well, what solutions, what services, what products out there can actually satisfy control X, control Y, control Z? Well, we didn't really have anything to point folks to. And so we've now built what we're calling the products and services directory, where you can actually go and see the products and services that will solve any gaps you have for the specific requirements where you may have a gap. So this is publicly available. The URL is down at the bottom of the slide, hitrustdirectory.com. You can go out there now and start to look at, hey, I know I have this gap, or I'm not doing well on this HITRUST control, or I'm not doing well in this HITRUST domain. Who can help me, or what products and services can help me do that? That's available to you. What I would offer, and to kind of tie this all together, is when you marry up the shared responsibilities matrices that we've talked about with the products and services directory, the homework in addressing and identifying gaps becomes that much easier. It becomes that much more efficient, because you are actually able to tie, okay, so I have 50% inheritance with Cloudticity on this one control. AWS is adding another 25%. I'm responsible for the remaining 25. What products or services are out there that can help me close this gap? And the products and services directory is the answer to that. So I'll pause there. Kate or Cheryl, anything to add on this?
Yeah, just that you can find our listing for our managed cloud services here if you want to check that out. And like Ryan said, you can search for whichever controls that you are missing and find vendors that can help you fill those gaps.
No, and I think this is great. It solves a need for, it's what we deal with at AWS too, because kind of like I was talking about the bundles and putting, all the pieces together. So you don't have to go searching for, 10 different solutions or vendors. This is going to help streamline that process. So, hey, I need to meet this control. I can look at this vendor and they're going to help ease my burden in order to get HITRUST certified.
So with that said, I think we're on to questions. So because I really appreciate people holding me accountable, one of our esteemed external assessors pointed a couple things out to me in the Q&A box. So I want to do a couple things. One, I typically shamelessly plug, as a recovering external assessor, to get an external assessor into the process as early as possible, ideally before you even start to scope your assessment. A couple reasons why. One, they are the authorized organizations to conduct HITRUST work. They're the ones doing this every single day. They are working with the HITRUST quality team. They're working with the HITRUST assurance team, that in some cases working with our standards team and our research team to really understand what the heck it is that HITRUST is looking for. And they're the ones that understand, primarily through pain, where the pitfalls are within a HITRUST assessment. So I encourage all of you, get with an external assessor as early on in the process as possible. It will save you a whole lot of headache and heartache. What was pointed out in the chat is, when I was speaking about pulling your analysis on what's inheritable as early on in the process, it was mentioned that the external assessor plays a key role in that. And I can't harp on that enough. Again, they're the ones doing this every single day. They're hearing back from HITRUST on the rationale for certain levels of inheritance percentages, so on and so forth. So they are going to be your Sherpa through this entire process. Lean on them. They are going to interact with us. If they have a question or if there's something that's confusing, they do not hesitate to reach out to HITRUST to get these questions answered. We are more than happy to answer those questions. So don't go it alone, or don't think that you can do all this readiness work and remediation work and then have an external assessor come in and there not be bumps in the road. I'm not saying it's not possible. Just in my experience, it's usually pretty bumpy because HITRUST is its own unique animal, and these are the folks that are the most in tune with what it is. So want to point that out. Thank you for the bump from that external assessor in the chat box. I think there was a second comment that was made, which I'll hit the wave tops, but Cheryl, maybe you can dive in if there's anything additional. But someone from the AWS team said all inheritance requests are processed daily at 3 p.m. Pacific. So if there's anything that you all need, or if you're seeing issues with that, I would raise your hand if you're not seeing that. So Cheryl, I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. Any comments on that?
I don't really have insight. I don't have insight into that for my role. So but if there's questions or concerns from anybody that's on here, definitely you can reach out to me and I can get you in touch with the right people if you're encountering any issues, or if there's any questions that you have around inheritance.
Yeah, and just to dovetail off of what Ryan was saying, the importance of engaging with an external assessor early in the process. We highly recommend that. And just to mention that you guys can find our bundle on the AWS website, our HITRUST Accelerator bundle. If you just look up AWS Cloudticity HITRUST, you'll find it on the GSCA site. Our assessor is Beyond HC LLC. They're really cloud savvy, and they've created a joint offering with us to help you guys get all of those pieces that you need for your assessment in one bundle.
Yeah, and I'll hammer that point home that the both of you stated about external assessors, because they aren't your enemy. They are, you develop that relationship with them. They want to see you succeed as much as you want to succeed. So they're going to help you scope your environment, and along the way, they're going to help you remediate and let you know about those gaps that you need to fix in order to get certified.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I don't see any additional questions or comments coming through. I will offer that if there's any questions around the shared responsibilities program, the services that either AWS or Cloudticity offers as it relates to HITRUST and beyond, there's some links there on the slide. A shameless plug that we are having our HITRUST Collaborate conference on October 1st through 3rd in Frisco, Texas. So if anybody's familiar with it, we are hosting it at the Star, which is the practice facility for the Dallas Cowboys. It's actually a pretty cool spot. As a New York Giants fan, it pains me to say this. It's a really interesting area. They've got lots of shops, they've got lots of restaurants, lots of bars. So you're not captive at the conference itself. Everything's within walking distance. So it's at the OmniStar. Highly encourage folks to come out there if they're interested in learning more about shared responsibilities, or all the things that HITRUST is doing from a cyber insurance perspective, what we're doing with state and federal governments, all things AI. We have lots of announcements coming around AI and a lot of the work that we're doing from an AI perspective. So yeah, if you can make it out there, I think it'll be worth your while. There was some raving reviews last year with the folks that attended, but happy to answer any questions as far as that goes. Hopefully I'll see you there. You'll get to see my bright and shiny face pretty much every day, because our hostess here, Jessica, she likes to keep me busy at our conference. So I'm all over the place. If there are no other...
You'll be seeing us there too. We always sponsor, we always attend. I highly recommend that you go if HITRUST is something that you are working on, or you already have, or you want to have. So hope to see you there.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions. We'll get done a little bit early, which is always nice. I hope everybody has a great day. If there was a question, I just want to point it out. The slides and stuff will be sent out afterwards. If there's any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us. So everybody have a great day. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.